Welcome back. Trial Tuesday once again, and our good friend, the Prince of Jurisprudence himself, David Aylor, here with a legal perspective regarding an unarmed man shot and killed by a police officer up in North Carolina, ripped right from the headline. So, David, the officer has been arrested for manslaughter at this point. Give us the details of this case.
Well, it's a very sort of unique situation. From everything that I've found so far, essentially this individual had gotten in a car wreck sometime early in the morning around 2 or 3 a.m. and ultimately went looking for what it appears to be help and had knocked on a lady's house. She got startled thinking it was her husband coming home from work, and obviously it wasn't, and she originally called the police. Now from there, as far as the details they've released, has been somewhat sketchy to determine exactly what happened next. But ultimately what we do know is that this individual was tased and apparently kept going at that point. I don't know if that means in direction of the officers to attack or what that may have been, but the end result, of course, is a tragedy in that he actually died, and then the investigation there further found that he did not have any weapon on him at all.
So it seems, however, though, this is a strange case because that officer now facing manslaughter charges, but if the gentleman was tased and did not go down, that's failure to comply for a police officer, right? Does that give them that that benefit of the doubt that they can use lethal force?
Well, obviously at this point, that police officer now will have a defense to the crime just like anybody else would be provided that opportunity. But essentially there's not really enough facts to come out, but just because a person is tased and their reaction doesn't ultimately mean you can use deadly force. And that'll really be the key that they can look at. And I think this is an important example to see where the true review that goes into when there are police officer shootings. We obviously had one here recently in Hanahan, South Carolina, where someone unfortunately passed away. And the scrutiny that the officers go under is extreme as far as what they did, the steps they took, and whether or not those steps were justified. And if, in fact, they were not, they will be criminally charged.
How much of a legal process goes into those police officer-involved shooting cases? I know that the state law enforcement division gets involved here, and then, of course, there's internal affairs in most police departments. But what about outside influences? Are there private lawyers that come in as well?
Well, a lot of times private lawyers, I know I do this sometimes myself, you're part of different groups that help police officers and will represent the police officers. So as soon as a shooting occurs, before any statements are made, the police officers often will have legal representation, and that's really just to protect themselves regardless of whether or not there's any flaws in their actions.
Now, a manslaughter charge for this officer, where do you think this goes forward from here? Because as you said, that's pretty unique.
Well, I mean, one thing you're going to see is a lot of outcry from the public. Obviously, this was an unarmed man who passed away in this situation, so you're probably going to see a lot of public attention and outrage related to what actually happened. Time will tell to determine exactly the facts that will come out around it to determine if, in fact, that officer had some sort of justification for why actually he used lethal force.
Now, of course, that officer's been taken off the street. He's got to hand in his gun and go on some kind of administrative leave for a little while. What's the process like for that, for filing, going through this whole trial process, especially with internal affairs, then going to a court of law? How long does that usually take to play out?
Well, if an officer's just under review for a shooting, let's just say like there was one locally, they're going to be put on administrative leave during that period of time. Once they're cleared, they're then going to come back to normal duty. However, in this situation, obviously he was charged quickly, and then other times after the review, they'll be charged. And at the point they're charged, most often they're released from the force. Sometimes they can leave them on suspension. That's going to be determined by the actual chief himself in that agency. But ultimately, the case will take just as long as any other case in terms of going through the process of having the grand jury indict him, having a preliminary hearing, and those steps that they would take for any other person. Because at this point, he's no longer a police officer in the eyes of the law. He's a defendant for a manslaughter charge.
Certainly a disturbing case and one we will be following. Attorney David Aylor,
thanks
thank
for
you for your
having
time,
me.
sir. Do appreciate it. We'll be right back with more Low Country Live after this.